Colleagues, good morning. We've formed a quorum and is also the appointed time and call the meeting to order. Can we first confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of March 2013? So far, the Secretariat has not received any proposal for amendments. So can we confirm the minutes now? Thank you. Since the last meeting, the Secretariat has received 4 information papers, details of which can be found on the agenda. This is going to be the last meeting of this session, so we don't have to discuss the agenda for the next meeting. All right, any comments or questions about the 4 papers? If not, we go on to the 4th item, the operating rights of the peak tramway. Please invite the administration to join us. The next item is on private driving instructors' licenses. Over 50 deputations or individuals have been invited to join this part, so we must be on time. Let us first welcome Professor Anthony Cheung, Secretary for Transport and Housing, Mr. Joseph Lai, Permanent Secretary for Transport and Housing, Mr. Andy Chen, Deputy Secretary for Transport and Housing, Ms. Kathy Wong, Deputy Law Officer from DFJ, Mrs. Marinda Yim, Assistant Commissioner for Tourism, and Ms. Doris Chow, Assistant Director of Lands, and Dr. Leung Kin Man, Assistant Director of ENMS. Welcome. All right, if you're ready, Professor Cheung, please walk us through the paper. Thank you, and good morning, Chairman. We'd like to consult members on the operating rights of the peak tramway. In the past 30 years, the big tram has been used for recreational and tourism purposes. So very pleased that we have the Economic Bureau and the Tourism Commission with us to assist our discussion. So I'd like to brief you on the background of the operating rights. The peak tramway was first established in 1888 by the private sector, so as to serve a hotel at the peak operated by the same group. So it was first used as a means of public transport, but in recent decades it is now mainly a tourism and recreational facility. It is now being operated by the PTC, and in 1983 to 1995 was given a grant. It was granted a 10-year operating right, and then in 2003 the current term was approved by the Seeing Council then, and the period would expire by the end of this year. Late last year, the company asked for an extension of the operating rights, and earlier this year, it gave us a proposal to upgrade its services and to expand its capacity. So the administration was asked as to whether we can grant a more than 10-year operating period so as to make the plan financially viable. We have read Section 2A5 and 2A6 of the ordinance, and the interpretation is actually different from what was understood by the administration and the PTC. Both parties thought that the ordinance could allow us to grant a renewal more than once. That is, so long as the company comes to apply for a renewal or extension and to pay the premium as required, we can just prolong the franchise, and there is no need to extend or to amend the legislation. Now, it's found that the understanding is not correct. The DFJ has considered the legislative background of the ordinance and considered the provisions in depth. And the conclusion is that for Section 2A5 and 2A6, they can only serve once. They can only be exercised in the last extension in 2003, that is. So under the current ordinance, there is no right for the administration to grant another franchise period. So we must amend the legislation to allow the administration to do that. So we have to study and decide the long-term arrangement for the operating rights of the tramway. And different departments will have to consider whether the upgrading plan is feasible or not. A lot of work is involved, it's complicated, and legislative amendment is needed, and it's impossible that the legislative process can be completed by the end of this year. Given the special circumstances and to ensure that peak tramway services will not be affected, we are now proposing a more pragmatic approach. We will go through a two-step approach. First, we will amend the legislation slightly so that the operating rights can be granted for 2 years as in transition after payment of a premium. And during the interim period, the administration will have to consider the details of the long-term operating rights and to study whether the upgrading plan from the company is feasible and viable or not. And of course, we have to consult this panel and also the Economic Services panel. After that, we will propose another round of legislative amendment. The 2-year period will include the time to be taken by the Council to scrutinize the relevant legislation. If members are agreeable, we propose to introduce a plan to the Council in the first instance after the summer recess, hoping that the process can be over by the end of this year so that the new operating right period can follow upon the expiry of the current period without any disruption to service. Thank you. Mr. Wong Kwok Heng, Mr. Mlung Singh, Yu Shiwing, Tanka Bill, Ronnie Tong have put up their hands. 4 minutes each, please. And Tony Z. Mr. Wong Kwok Heng, I was rather shocked by this paper. A 100-year-old company has served Hong Kong for more than 1 century without the peak tram. There won't be visits to the peak, and that means that we will lose one important icon of Hong Kong. It is impossible not to grant an extension of the operating right. It's rather strange and surprising that the administration has got into this blunder. So I'd like to ask the administration, what's the cause of this blunder, and how can we ensure that this will not happen again? Because the one-off provision arrangement is quite strange. So my question is, how can you avoid further similar blunders? And how can you ensure that peak tram service can continue after the 2-year interim period? I'm worried whether the staff would be affected because the peak tram serves our tourism industry. How can we ensure that the peak tram services can continue? I know that there will be upgrading plan from the company. I'd like to know whether it is conducive to the long-term development of Hong Kong. So the third question is, well, I hope that you can arrange a site visit for us to PTC so we can understand their upgrading plan to ensure that extension of the operating rights and the upgrading plan is indeed conducive to the long-term development of Hong Kong. Mr. Wong Kwok Heng said he was quite shocked by the news. And actually, the interpretation of the provisions came as a surprise to us as well. Both the government and PTC thought that the provisions would allow an extension of course, subject to the decision by the City Council, depending on the performance and also the upgrading plan of the PTC. How come we have made this blunder as described by Mr. Wong Kwok Heng? Now, if you look at the legislative amendments, or we've checked the legislative literature in the 1980s and the 1990s, and we could not find the cause of it. Now, if a provision can only be invoked for once, usually it would be provided expressly in the bill or the ordinance, and there would also be exit arrangements. However, both are absent in the ordinance. Of course, we cannot speculate what was the legislative considerations back then. When in the 1990s, the ordinance was amended, and checking the record, we understand that there was a bills committee or subcommittee to vet the ordinance, but this issue was not raised. Yes, the government has found it regrettable as well. We propose that after the 2-year interim period, we will amend the legislation to set out the details. Of course, the PTC will have to accept this fact. We're going to spend the interim 2 years to discuss with it in details the upgrading plan, and of course the panel will have the opportunity to discuss the plan as well. Mr. Wong asked whether we can arrange a site visit for members. Well, we will relay this request to PTC. Mr. Mlang Shing. Mr. Wong mentioned this blunder. I remember that there was a similar problem with the construction of a pedestrian footbridge for Wayan House long time ago, and I think it's rather futile to try to go back what happened in history. So let's face the reality. The peak tram is part of our collective memory, and it also benefits Hong Kong. So let's see. Let's be forward-looking and see how we're going to deal with this scenario, to be pragmatic. So I've read para 8, A, B, C, D.
Now, in para 8A is about the replacement of tram cars. There's an increasing number of tourists and passengers, and when you go past the terminus, you find that the area is crowded. So, with the replacement of tram cars, the capacity will be raised. It can be raised by over 60%. I consider it's safe. And if it's safe and that it can raise the capacity, I welcome this proposal. And para 8C is about upgrading the haulage system so as to maintain safety and reliability. Now, understand that because if you raise the capacity, you need a stronger haulage system. So in terms of software and hardware, the PTC has to do a good job. Now, my question is about requirement of safety. There will be an increase of capacity by 60%. So, are there any criteria to ensure safety in the future? And will there be any follow-up measures to follow on any new safety criteria to see if they are met? Peak trams have its own characteristics. We will have larger tram cars. Will the appearance of the tram cars be considered? Because tram cars, peak trams, they form part of our collective memory? Will there be any competitions on the design of new tram cars so that more people will get involved? And that we will enhance the publicity for this kind of transport which has been in Hong Kong for over a century. I think these will be good ideas for you. Secretary, a brief answer, please. Now, I agree that there is an increase in the number of passengers, and so the PTC are already introducing measures to manage the crowd, and they even encourage early ticket booking so as to shorten the waiting period. And so it's important for the PTC to upgrade the system to deal with the increased number of passengers. They have put forward upgraded plans and that involve more investment on the PTC. That's why the long-term arrangement will affect their plans for long-term investment. We propose a 2-year interim period. And even with or without this period, the PTC has to maintain safety. And our department also monitor the safety system. Mr. Yu Si-wing, the peak tram is very much welcomed by tourists. Now, some people even opt for the peak tram trip to the peak rather than go to the Disneyland. And so we have to plan the way forward for the peak tram. I agree that we should introduce the 2-year interim period and to expedite the legislative amendments as early as possible. My question is about the premium arrangement for the 2-year period. And will the administrative amendments be affected? By the upgraded plans? Secretary, under the existing laws, the PTC should not have any expectations. We have this problem with the interpretation at present, but even if the extension continues, it is subject to the decision of CE in Council. I agree with Mr. Yu that the peak tram forms one of the attractions in Hong Kong, and tourists come to Hong Kong, we definitely take a trip on the peak tram. So the administration very much hopes that we will continue with the operation of peak trams. Now, in the 2-year interim period, we have a lot to discuss with the PTC, for example, on continued investment and to provide better service in the long run, and that there should be exit arrangement in the legislation. All these will be discussed within our tight time frame. But we don't want to extend the interim period because we don't want to give people the impression that we are stalling the exercise. As for the calculation of premium, I'll defer to my colleagues in the Lands Department, Assistant Director of Lands. Thank you, Chairman. Well, we calculate the premium in accordance, following the practice of professional surveyors. We take into account similar precedents. We also made reference with details concerning cases where franchise is granted by CE in Council. We also made reference with the calculation of premium amongst professional surveyors. You still have to discuss with the party on the premium as to whether it is reasonable, right? And will the amount be proposed by the administration or the other party? Ms. Chow, why don't you tell us the whole process? Will there be any independent assessment by the Lands Department? Yes, after that, the proposed premium will be offered to the PTC for their consideration. When we calculate the premium in other cases, there is an appeal mechanism that is also applicable to PTC. The other party can put forward their grounds of objection, and that will be considered, and we will make an independent assessment which is conducted by the professional in our department. There is a committee where the assistant director and other colleagues as well as professional surveyors sitting in to deal with the matter. Mr. Tang, my question is related to the premium. In para 2, it says that the pig tram is no longer a part of public transport, so you can't really tell the exact amount of premium. I think the tracks belong to the administration, where the terminus belongs to the other party, and the premium was calculated in 2003, and the amount was $38.8 million. We all know what happened in 2003, and now the property prices have risen. And so what's your view to that? The PTC mixed profit is no longer operating public transport. We may appreciate their good work, but we also have to consider the cover. So can you tell us more about the criteria in considering the premium? That's my first point. Next.
咧就譬如每一年呢一個殘疾人士嘅即係國際殘疾人士嘅國際復康日咧，佢都起碼一日咧。係俾嗰啲殘疾人士拎住嗰個殘疾人士登記證咧，係免費搭3頂纜車嘅。我所知道，所以呢個係值得肯定嘅，即係岸平360都冇嘅。咁既然即係佢想建立一個更好嘅形象，或者市民更加愛戴佢，可唔可以喺即係關懷一啲嘅即係弱勢上面再做多啲嘅功夫咧？如果佢肯再做。
So will the Onping 360 introduce any concessionary prices to disabled people? And next, will there be any arrangement concerning insurance to ensure safety? Chairman, I will take the second question, and then for the rest I'll defer to my colleagues in Lands Department. The implication on staff in PTC. No, we don't want the service to be disrupted because pig tram is very important to Hong Kong, especially in the tourism industry. We don't want any problems to arise from the existing legislation. Now, the PTC has been operating the pig tram for over 100 years. The 2 termini belong to the PTC, whereas the area in between belongs to the administration. We don't want the staff of PTC to be affected. We will make long-term arrangement for pig tram within the 2-year interim period. But if there's any major changes come into place, then the PTC will be affected. Ms. Chow, your reply to the other questions. When we calculate the premium, we will consider the revenue, the profits of the PTC. They are operating on government land, and so we will calculate the profit they make from that. We have to wait for the decision of CEN Council in granting the franchise to PTC, so we cannot review the amount of the premium. What about measures to the disadvantaged? Will you talk to the operators? I thank Mr. Tang for his concern. We will pass this message to PTC. If we can show more concern to the disabled and the disadvantaged group, it will be even better for the image of Hong Kong. Mr. Ronnie Tong. The DOJ, Legislative Council, the PTC, the administration all made a mistake, and that's why we have this problem. This is really incredible. I read the legislation, and my interpretation is that there should be one fixed period of franchise and another period of flexible period of franchise. The administration has not taken care of what will happen after the expiry of one franchise. So it's a mistake on their part. And of course, the PTC would not have said a thing because it would get another 2 years to operate. And so you have no choice. The administration has no choice but to give them a 2-year interim period to operate. I understand that the peak tram is important to Hong Kong's image, but you can't extend the franchise like forever. There should be open tendering. There should be competition so as to improve service. If the same company will be is going to be the operator for the long run, and there is no question about its franchise being extended, this will be a problem. Many people complain about the long queue at the terminus. There are also complaints about the ticket price. If you simply grant the franchise, there is no incentive to improve the situation. If you're telling me in 1997, everybody involved made the same mistake, this is just incredible. I find it hard to accept. The franchise should be set at a limit of 20 years only, I think. And that's the case. It's just that the administration has not thought about what will happen after the 2 franchises were granted. And I don't think there was any intention to give the franchise to the same company forever. So you have to introduce some clauses, some provisions to ensure there will be other companies joining the competition.
Professor Zhou, how come we have arrived, or we've come to this rather embarrassing situation? Well, I said we really cannot find out the cause from our records. Now, if indeed there is nothing in the ordinance on exit arrangements, and there is no mention that these are one-off provisions. Should that be the case, it should be expressly provided, but we could not find such things in the ordinance and legislative documents. There were 2 amendments to the ordinance so far. In the 1980s, the exit arrangements were removed, and then the amendments in the 1990s was an extension of the operating rights after 10 plus 10 years. So the administration and the PTC's understanding all along has been that the operating right could be extended. But of course, the interpretation, according to interpretation by the DOJ, that is not possible. Indeed, we have to work in hurriedly, given that there are only 2 years for interim for transition. I understand Mr. Ronnie Tong's question. Should the company be allowed to operate the peak tram perpetually, or should there be a better arrangements? Well, in the second round of legislative amendments, that is amending the legislation for the long term, we will consider that. I don't think you have understood me. I don't think you have understood me. It is rather unacceptable that all parties involved made the same mistake. A more logical deduction would be the peak tram or PTC would only be given 20 years of operating rights, and you should have thought of how to cope with this situation earlier on. So please don't blame it on the provisions. How come by looking at the provisions, you can come to the conclusion that it was not the original intent of the government or the legislature that the operating rights could only be extended for 1 term? No, I was not trying to blame it on the parties involved back then. I was just referring to the historical records. In 2003, the CE in Council approved the 10-year operating rights until 2013. We checked internal documents of the government, and all government departments back then thought that the operating right could be extended again. So, of course, the incumbent officers were involved, but I'm certainly not blaming it on them. Well, it's already so late, and you only start to tackle this problem now. This is regrettable. The big tram is an icon of Hong Kong, and therefore we should not allow it to be disrupted. And the interim period proposal is like a last resort. However, a lot of issues have to be sorted out. What if they cannot be sorted out in 2 years? Perhaps you should consider some flexibility or give a little bit more time. And I know we are all concerned about the premium. How should the premium be calculated in the future? Yes, we can have time to work it out. But I believe the premium should also be just adjusted for the interim period. According to the paper, the premium is assessed on the basis of full market value, and the past profits generated from the peak tram service will also be taken into consideration. Well, past profits are something in the past, and there is no control over the adjustment of fares. There have been 3 rounds of fare adjustment in the past. So you can only consider its past profits. But what about possible fare adjustment? Would there be a fare freeze in the coming 2 years? There is no control over the fares. I know the premium is related to the land price, and PTC only owns the land of the 2 termini. So, in fact, it's difficult for another party to take over the operation unless you have another terminus. But I believe it is quite difficult to adjust the alignment. So, will the PTC be forbidden to increase fares in the coming 2 years? In the current ordinance, there is no provision to control the fares. When the ordinance was amended in the 1980s, it was decided that the government would deregulate, or rather withdraw control, because from a public transport service it was turned into a tourism and recreational facility. And in assessing the premium, we will consider the market value and also trends. Of course, I cannot disclose the details now, but we will discuss with the PTC in the future. When necessary, the Lands Department can supplement. For the coming 2 years, our idea is just to extend the current operating right for 2 years without changing the arrangements. And we have to reassess the premium. Assuming that we cannot complete the legislative exercise on the long-term arrangements, we will see what measures can be taken to ensure that our peak tram services will not be disrupted. In October, when we submit a bill to just extend the right by 2 years, we will provide the details. Mr. Poon? The Star Ferry and the Peak Tramway are two icons of Hong Kong and also very popular. Professor Cheung proposes to amend or to extend the operating right by 2 years to buy time to discuss with PTC the long-term arrangements. I understand that the capacity of the tram cars will be boosted by over 60%. We feel that the big tram is an icon of Hong Kong. Our members are concerned about the new design of tram cars. However, I have another concern. Some may feel that the current waiting time is too long. So will the administration set any targets when it comes to the improvement of service? Currently, there aren't too many complaints, and there is a lot of applause. And in the annex, we know about some complaints on service performance. And I'm also concerned about the pay and morale of frontline staff. The patronage has been rising. In your future discussion, will you have anything to safeguard the pay and conditions of service of their staff? Right from the 1980s, the Peak Tramway has been positioned as a tourism and recreational facility instead of a public transport service. So the fares have been deregulated since then. Although it is a private service, if it's not treating its staff well, and if services are poor, it will affect its own operation. Of course, whenever the operating right is due for extension, we should consider the service performance as well as the safety performance. Regarding the long-term arrangements, we have to consider Mr. Ronnie Tong's question. Should we assume that the current company will be the only operator or will always be the operator of the Peak Tram? We will consider this, and we will also listen to views from the Council. At present, the service of the Peak Tramway is satisfactory, and it has also it's also popular among the public. What about staff morale? Para C or Para 3 of Annex C, you can see that in the past 10 years, that is during the operating period, where they're carrying 16,000 passengers per day, and yet there are only 1 or 2 complaints per year regarding the attitude of staff. So those complaints have nothing to do with their service performance. Mrs. Yim? Yes, I have nothing to add in this regard. We have consulted the tourism industry. In general, they are satisfied with the performance of the big tramways. Dr. KWOK. Thank you. As said by many members, the peak tramway is part of our collective memory, comparable to the Star Ferry. And if the big tramway is to disappear, then I'm sure there will be a lot of objection from the community. So the administration has checked historical records. I'd like to know whether there is information to hint that the operator would be replaced. I find it hard to contemplate that the British or the colonial government or the SL government have ever considered phasing out the peak tramway. In other places, well, similar tramways have become characteristic of the city and also important tourism icon. I agree that we should provide an interim period for the government to work out the long-term arrangements, but I doubt whether 2 years is enough. In fact, I'm a bit worried. So if the administration asks for 3 years instead, I will also support. This situation is very unique. The land on the terminal is owned by the PTC, whereas the track runs on government land. I'd like to know whether there is any restriction on the land lease of the terminal. Is there any requirement that the land must be used for the operation of the peak tramway? Professor Zhang, I'll invite my colleague from the Lands Department to answer questions related to land issues. Indeed, I agree with colleagues. The peak tramway is a unique feature of Hong Kong. It's an icon here, and even overseas visitors like to ride the tramway. We don't want the peak tram service to be disrupted for whatever reasons.
The PT has been running. The peak tram has been running for over 100 years. At the beginning, the peak tram was built to serve people living in the hotel on the peak, and later it turned into a kind of transportation for people living on the peak. In the 80s, the peak tram has become very popular with tourists, and now it has become a tourism and recreational facility. We very much hope that the service will continue. Now, for the 2-year interim, we're talking about a period starting from January 1st, 2014. In fact, at present, we are talking with the PTC concerning long-term arrangement. So if the interim period is agreeable to both parties, we will waste no time. We will expedite discussion with the PTC on future arrangements. Dr. Low, Assistant Director of Lands. For the 2 lots where the terminals are on, the lot should be for repair and operation of peak tram, and that should not be for industrial use. With the permission of Director of Lands, the land can be used for recreational use by the PTC. Dr. Low, all right? Yes. Mr. Michael Tan. Chairman, I agree with the points made by most members today, and that is Hong Kong needs the peak tram, and I think they are providing satisfactory services so far. So I agree with the extension of 2-year operating period. Now, this is not the most challenging part. The most important thing is how we're going to deal with the situation after the 2-year interim period. I find it quite puzzling. Meanwhile, I would like to thank the DOJ for spotting this mistake and so stop this kind of automatic renewal of operating rights perpetually. This is something unheard of around the world. All right, this merry-go-round stops. So we face many challenges in the 2-year interim. Now, the 2 termini stand on private land. How can we stop the operation of the peak tram, except if the government allocates 2 pieces of land for the operation of termini? But then you cannot regulate the fare. So how can you calculate the premium? Let's say if they are making a huge profit, what are we to do? So theoretically, you should know their balance. And so you can regulate their profit. Otherwise, you can't really make a commercial agreement that is acceptable to the public. Now, you are in a difficult situation because the 2 termini do not stand on government land. And the next problem is that the peak tram has become a kind of recreational tourism facility. Now, we don't know the journey time of peak tram. We don't know the fare arrangement, whether there will be a fare adjustment. And they are saying that they will increase the capacity by introducing new tram cars. Now, you say that the peak tram is a kind of tourist attraction, but you can reach the peak taking other kinds of transportation. So all these problems are really challenges for you, and you have to come up with an answer to all these questions. You have to ensure they are not making unreasonably high profits, and you can't really regulate their fare. And as I said, people can reach the peak by taking other transports. You have fare regulation for these other transportation, but not for the peak. So these are the challenges. Secretary, do you agree that you face lots of challenges? Yes, I agree. Well, the councillor said that the situation is strange. I wouldn't say that, but I agree that there are challenges for us. There is a unique history behind the peak tram. And in the 80s, the LegCo agreed that there would not be any fare regulation, and it also removed the exit arrangement. And most of the passengers are tourists. Will transport be affected if the peak tram doesn't run anymore? Not necessarily. There will not be major implication because people can also take the bus and the minibus. Sorry, Secretary. We are in a tight time frame. I must start the next discussion item at 10. We have over 50 deputations with us today, and we're going to discuss the PDI license issuing. 3 members are waiting to speak, and I have to set a time limit to 3 minutes to each member. So, Secretary, please be brief. Mr. Paul Share, Frankie Yik, and Wu Chi-wai. Mr. Paul Share. Chairman, I'm not a member of this panel. I'm only going to give you my views. I don't need a reply. Ronnie Tong talked about the legislative intention. It seems to me there is a time limit to the operating rights. That's 10 years. And I don't think there is a problem of monopoly here. But we have to see if that's the case. The PTC is requesting an extension of operating rights, and if they had not raised the request, then nobody would spot the mistake. Now, still, we're faced with this situation. Now, for the first two extension, you set the premium at 2.7 million, and then the last one, $36.8 million. But we don't know the balance of the PTC. Is it making a huge profit, and is the 36 million plus a reasonable amount for premium? Now, for the 2-year interim and for future extension, apart from the fare adjustment, you also have to apart from the premium, you have to consider the land use. Are you allowing monopoly if the situation is allowed to continue? And is the administration rather passive in the discussion of future arrangements? I don't think this is a kind of transportation. It's a kind of amphibian. It's more of a tourist attraction like Ngongping 360. So, can the administration have some say in the operation instead of leaving things entirely to the operator? Next, about parking of taxi, of other transportation. Will you ask the operator, or will the administration build barrier-free access linking the MTR station to the peak tram termini? Will this be one of the conditions for extension of operating rights? I have only 5 seconds left. I don't need a reply from the secretary here. Now, Mr. Share raised some points. Please consider them. Mr. Frankie Yik, many members have raised technical points for the administration. I want to ask this question. Is there any intellectual property rights registered to the PTC? And can the operation of peak tram be tendered out? I remember at the time, there was a time when the appearance of the tram cars was subject to major criticism. So you can't all of a sudden change the appearance of the tram car. It's the first time I have heard about this time limit to the operating rights. I think this is something for the administration to think about. We have to check whether there is intellectual property issue involved. For long-term arrangement, that is what will happen after the 2-year interim, whether there should be exit arrangements, and if so, how and what it should be about. Now, the calculation of premium may not necessarily be put into the legislation, but we, of course, have to consider factors like profits of the operator. This will be considered. And for fare, should that be considered? Now, these are details that we haven't reached yet. But in the long run, when I talk about long-term arrangement, I'm not talking about the next 10 years, but the time beyond that. Mr. Wu, the exercise we face is not simple. Because of past mistakes, we are left with this situation. and we have no choice but to accept the 2-year interim. The PTC is like a monopoly, and this may be a challenge to the review exercise. Now, if you can't complete the task at hand within the 2-year period, will you come back and ask for an extension? Secretary, if the 2-year interim is supported by members, after the summer recess in October, we will put forward legislative arrangements and amendments for the 2-year interim. And if we can't complete the legislative exercise within the 2 years, we'll also keep members updated about the progress. And of course, we will consider points raised by members today. After the summer recess, the paper will be submitted. I hope the points we raised today will be incorporated, and you can also give us a time frame about the exercise and the points you will consider for the future policy. Now, government land is granted to a company to operate. This is important, and so you have to consider this policy and the implication. Secretary, the points raised today will be included in the paper to be submitted in October. The peak tram has its history and its characteristics, and members hope that the peak tram will continue to run. As for extension of operating rights, fare adjustment, service performance should also be enhanced. We hope the extension will not be just a one-off extension. We hope that the administration will have the power to decide on extension in the future. Now, this situation may not be necessarily bad because it offers us a chance to decide on the way forward. So, administration, please consider points raised today. Any objection to the administration's proposal? That is to submit a paper on the 2-year interim period in October. No objection. All right. Thank you, Secretary. Thank you.
So we end the discussion of this item here. The next item, private driving instructors' licenses. We'll have 2 sessions. In the first, we will meet 25 deputations and individuals to give us their views on the subject, and then we'll take a break of 10 minutes. In the next session, there will be another 26 deputations and individuals attending. Please invite the deputations and individuals to come in. Attending our meeting in this session, we have Mr. Yao Xingmo, Under Secretary for Transport and Housing, Mr. Patrick Chen, Deputy Secretary, Ms. Cinderella Law, Deputy Commissioner for Transport, Mr. Cheung Ching Peng, Assistant Commissioner, and Mr. Patrick Wong, Chief Transport Officer. Welcome. Let's wait until all deputations and individuals are settled.
On
behalf of the panel, I'd like to welcome deputations and individuals who have come here to comment on the proposals. May I remind you that in front of you there is a microphone and an earpiece. If necessary, please wear the earpiece and choose the channel you prefer. Channel 1 is Cantonese, Channel 2 English. And may I remind you that your remarks to the panel are not protected by the powers and electrical powers and privileges ordinance Cap 386, and the same applies to your written submissions. And we have quite a number of deputations, so may I remind you to be succinct as you speak as far as possible. For those who have yet to give us a written submission, you are welcome to provide it to us after the meeting so that we can be informed of your position more clearly. Thank you. So I invite you to speak, and each speaker will have up to 2 minutes to speak. First, I'll invite the Undersecretary to say a few words for up to 2 minutes. Thank you. Well, we have a two-pronged approach for a driver training policy, and there is a background to this policy because transport is busy in Hong Kong and road space is limited. So in 1980, the government decided to provide all street driver training through the setting up of designated driving schools, so that alongside on-street driving training by private driving instructors. So this is what we call the two-pronged approach. The first designated driving school, or DDS, was established in 1983, and the Transport Department issued driving instructors' licenses to the driving instructors employed by the driving school. And to stick with the policy of not issuing any new PDI licenses, TD issued driving instructor licenses to the respective driving instructors with the condition that the license holders may only give driving instruction on behalf of the driving school. That is RDI, restricted driving license, instructors' licenses. In 1999, the policy was reviewed, and we decided to keep the two-pronged approach with legislative support. However, given the traffic conditions on the road, we cannot allow too many on-street driver training vehicles because that would delay our traffic. So we have seen no rationale to amend the two-pronged approach. However, against this background, in para 12, we are proposing 9 options for your reference. You might have noticed that in some options, we will offer more opportunities to experienced driving instructors. And different options will have different implications to different stakeholders. We also have to bear in mind public interest. I'd like to stress here that the administration maintains an open mind as far as the options are concerned. We'll listen to your views very carefully, and where necessary, if we want to change the current system, we can only do so by legislative amendment. If there is any option with clear and staunch support of any particular of all stakeholders, we will introduce legislative amendments as soon as possible. And if there is any mainstream views expressed here, it will be of great use to the Council when considering the relevant legislative proposals. I'm all ears to your comments. All right, thank you. First, we give the floor to Mr. Lin. Thank you. Good morning, Chairman, members of the Council, and friends from the industry. We have not been asking for any of the 9 options here. We want justice. We want a uniformed approach for issuing licenses. We don't want the two-pronged approach. Well, DDS can employ driving instructors. They can also employ PDIs. But because of our DIs, we are bullied by DDS. We have to labor for them. We're being exploited. The two-pronged approach is a slavery license. It's collusion between the government and the business sector, and it has given rise to a very unjust situation. We want none of the 9 options. We want justice. We want DDS to employ driving instructors at market value and to be fair to everyone. The government should not allow it to do so. I've been an instructor for 24 years, and 2 years afterwards I'll be useless. I can't do anything because the license will be invoked. This is an unjust government. Please, stewards, come to help.
我哋暫停。
I will